The galaxy had been quiet for many years, but silence in the galaxy never lasted for long. And far beyond the known borders of the alien coalition, something was moving in the dark, something that had not been seen for generations. The humans had returned. No one knew where they had gone after their wars had ended, and their colonies had been broken. Some said they had destroyed themselves. Others said they had vanished into deep space and were never coming back. But they had been wrong, because now the deep sensors on the edge of the rim sector were picking up strange signals. At first they looked like noise-static waves that meant nothing, but then the readings became clearer, and someone finally saw the truth. Huge ships were moving through the void with no transponder codes, no radio chatter, and no sign of life yet. There was power behind them, like the pulse of a storm waiting to hit. At the central command of the coalition fleet, an alarm began to echo. Officers ran across the decks, calling for data feeds. The commander, a tall, gray-skinned alien with 4 narrow eyes, leaned forward as the hologram lit up before him. Dozens of energy signatures were entering the system, each one massive. The officer in charge of detection whispered that it looked like a fleet, but not any fleet. They knew. The commander frowned. There were no coalition patrols scheduled to arrive from that direction. He asked for communication attempts. The officers tried every frequency, but there was no answer, only static. The commander ordered a combat formation just in case. Across the system, civilians on mining colonies were watching the night sky as bright trails appeared above their planets. Children pointed and laughed, thinking it was meteor showers, but the elders who had fought in older wars felt something else in their bones, something that told them to run. Ships began leaving the ports. Families packed what they could and fled to safer worlds because everyone could feel it. Something dangerous was coming. The alien fleet had no idea who they were about to face. They had fought many enemies before. They had defeated pirates, crushed rebellions, even fought each other. But this was different. There was something about the silence of those ships, something about the way they moved. They were coming in fast and tight. No hesitation, no formation errors. It was like watching a single mind control 100 metal beasts. When the first human ship broke through the dark, it looked nothing like any known design. It had no bright markings, no flag, no sound of engines. Its hull was black, covered in strange angular armor that seemed to drink light rather than reflect it. Scanners could not read what kind of metal it was built from. Even the artificial intelligence inside the coalition flagship began to glitch, unable to define the structure. A second later, the rest of the human fleet appeared behind it, one by one, like shadows walking out of fog. The commander shouted for all ships to prepare weapons. He demanded that they identify themselves, but again, there was only silence. Not a single response came through. Then, without warning, one of the coalition's forward cruisers exploded. It was not hit by a missile or a beam. The sensors could not even detect what had caused it to vanish one moment. It was there the next. It was gone. The commander stared in disbelief, then ordered all ships to open fire. Thousands of energy blasts shot into the void, lighting up space, like a storm of suns. But every single beam passed through empty darkness. The human ships were no longer there. Then they reappeared behind the coalition line in perfect formation. The humans had used some kind of slip movement no one had ever seen before. It was faster than light, but not warp travel. Not jump gates. They were moving through space as if it was a simple path they knew by heart. Before the coalition fleet could react again, their sensors jammed. Communication lines went dead, and power fluctuations began to shake their systems. Entire ships lost control of their thrusters and drifted helplessly, while human vessels glided past them, silently launching precise strikes that tore through their hulls with invisible force. Inside the human flagship, Admiral Keon stood before a wide glass panel. His eyes calm, his expression unreadable. The officers around him worked without speaking. Every command came through gestures. Lights blinked, screens updated, and entire enemy squadrons vanished with every quiet signal he gave. He had been trained for this since childhood. He knew every weakness the coalition ships had, every tactic they relied on. He knew how their shields worked, how their communication networks synced, and how to destroy them without giving them a single chance to adapt. He remembered the stories told on Earth, the stories of what the galaxy had done to them, The betrayals, the broken treaties, the colonies left to die. He remembered growing up among people who swore they would never again beg for peace now. He was watching those promises unfold in the cold silence of war. He did not hate the enemy. He simply had a mission, and it was clear. The battle was over before most of the alien captains realized it had begun. Explosions filled the distance like flowers blooming in slow motion. The coalition commander tried to send one last message, but his bridge was already on fire. His last sight was the reflection of a human dreadnought drifting past the wreckage, silent and untouched, as his ship disintegrated. Back on the colonies, people watched from afar as the lights in the sky changed color, blue, then red, then faded into nothingness. They did not know who had won, but they felt it. They felt that something had changed across the galaxy. Stations that had ignored old Earth transmissions for centuries suddenly began to pick up encrypted human signals, faint whispers of a language long forgotten one by one. Those signals reached out across the stars, marking systems, territories, and paths. It was like a ghost returning home. When the battle ended, the human fleet did not linger. They moved on quietly without salvaging the wreckage, without broadcasting victory. They came and went like a storm that had passed, leaving behind only silence and debris. The alien survivors who managed to send out distress signals spoke of ships that did not make a sound, weapons that left no trails, and soldiers who did not miss a single shot. Most thought they were hallucinating, others refused to speak at all. Some even claimed they saw faces behind the armor, cold human eyes staring through their helmets as if judging them before disappearing into the smoke. At the Coalition High Council, panic began to spread. Reports from the Warzone came in one after another, all saying the same thing. An unknown human fleet had destroyed their entire sector defense within hours. Some council members laughed in disbelief. Others demanded proof, but the data was undeniable. Ship signatures, power readings, and destroyed bases all confirmed it. Humans had returned, and they were stronger than anyone had ever imagined. In the following days, dozens of smaller fleets were sent to investigate, but none of them came back. Radar stations picked up traces of movement, but nothing visual. Some believed the humans were cloaked. Others believed they had already left, but there were whispers that they were watching, waiting for someone else to challenge them. Meanwhile, across the trade routes, rumors began to grow. Every pilot had a story about seeing dark ships in the distance. Every miner claimed to have heard strange transmissions. Every planet that once fought against humans began to quietly fortify their defenses. Back on the human flagship, Admiral Keon looked at the stars as his fleet regrouped around a dying sun. His officers stood silently awaiting his next command. He did not speak for a long time, then simply said, "One word. Proceed." The engines came to life again. The fleet turned and entered the void, leaving behind no trace of their presence, no debris, no beacon, no sound. Only the ghosts of their victory. The galaxy had thought humans were gone, forgotten, erased by time, but they had only been waiting, watching, and preparing. Now the silence was broken, and everyone who had once laughed at the idea of human danger would soon remember why the old stories had always ended. The same way whenever humans arrived, war itself changed. Long before the fleet had arrived in the Warzone, there were stories about Earth, stories that many thought were myths. Old tales passed down by the first explorers who had seen what humans could do when they were pushed too far in those times. The galaxy was divided into hundreds of empires, each one fighting for power and trade routes. Humans had been one of them, small but fierce. Their colonies spread across harsh worlds where most species could not survive. They were known for building cities in deserts, mining frozen planets, and fighting wars they were never supposed to win for a long time. The Council tried to control them, offering peace agreements and trade promises. But humans never fully trusted the Council, and the Council never fully trusted them. One mistake led to another, then betrayal after betrayal. And when the war finally came, the galaxy learned what humanity was capable of. The war had ended with a silence that fooled everyone. The Council believed they had crushed the human fleets. They destroyed their colonies, burned their trade routes, and forced the survivors to retreat into deep space. When the last human transmission went silent, the Council celebrated. They called it the final peace. No one realized that humanity was not gone. It was rebuilding, in secret, across asteroids, moons, and forgotten stations. Earth itself was sealed off. No one was allowed to enter the system, and every ship that tried was never heard from again. Admiral Keon was born many years after those wars. He grew up in underground bunkers hidden from scanners where the air smelled of iron and old engines. His parents told him stories about the time when humanity ruled dozens of worlds, but also about the time when they were hunted across the stars. He learned that revenge was not the goal. Survival was the goal, and survival meant strength. Every human child was trained to understand war, not because they wanted to fight, but because they had to. No one else would protect them. They built ships in silence, they trained in silence, they grew stronger in silence while the galaxy forgot them. The first time Keon saw the fleet, he was still young. The shipyards were deep inside an asteroid field, and from the outside it looked like nothing more than dust and rocks, but inside there were thousands of engineers working night and day, building something that no one else could see. He saw the dreadnought cores glowing like blue suns, the engines humming with quiet power. He knew even then that the fleet was not made for defense. It was made to remind the galaxy of what they had done to Earth for decades. The fleet remained hidden, tested, upgraded, and perfected until every ship could fight alone and still win against an entire armada. Keon was chosen to lead because he had something that others did not. He understood the enemy. He had studied every alien tactic, every council formation, and every mistake they had made in the old wars. He knew how they thought, how they feared, and how they lied when the time finally came. He did not hesitate. He accepted command and swore that humanity would never again kneel before anyone. When the council first heard whispers of human movement, they ignored them. They thought it was just pirates or smugglers trying to sound dangerous, but then small fleets began to vanish. Convoys disappeared. Colonies stopped reporting one after another. The council started to panic. They sent spies, but none returned. They sent patrols, but only wreckage came back. The name of the humans became a shadow word that no one wanted to say aloud. The old veterans who still remembered Earth warned the council that if humans had returned, they should seek peace, but pride was stronger than wisdom, and the council decided to send more fleets into the unknown. Keon watched all of this unfold from his command room. He saw how the alien worlds grew comfortable, how their fleets grew lazy, how they mocked the very name of humanity. He waited for the perfect time to strike, not out of hate but out of necessity. He knew that peace could only come when the galaxy remembered fear, because fear was the only thing that kept humans alive for centuries. Deep inside the flagship, there were men and women who had never seen Earth, only the stars. They called themselves the children of silence. They were born in space, raised among steel and shadows. They spoke little and obeyed orders without question. They trusted Keon completely because he never lied to them. He told them that this war would not bring glory or celebration. It would bring survival, and survival would be enough. Every person on those ships carried the memory of the past in their hearts. They fought not for revenge, but to make sure no one would ever make humans beg again. While the fleet prepared in secret, Earth had changed. It was no longer the broken planet the council had left behind. It had become something else. Its cities were rebuilt underground and underwater, protected by technology that no outsider could understand. The atmosphere was filled with satellites and drones that formed a shield around the planet. Even the moon had become a fortress, the once green and blue world now glowed faintly red at night when seen from orbit, a reminder that it was still alive and watching. There were people on Earth who questioned the plan. They asked why humanity had to return with war. Why not return with peace? Keon's answer was always the same. Peace without power is just waiting for another war. He had seen what happened when humanity asked for mercy. He had seen what happened when they trusted promises. So he would not repeat those mistakes. He believed that only through strength could peace ever mean something. The galaxy had forgotten human strength, but it had not forgotten human creativity. Humans were known to build things faster than anyone else, adapt quicker than anyone else, and fight longer than anyone else. That was what made them dangerous. They did not give up no matter how much they lost. They kept moving forward even when the universe pushed them back. The fleet was built with that spirit. Every weapon, every system, every design was meant to give them a chance even against impossible odds. When the time came to reveal themselves, the fleet did not rise out of pride. It rose out of purpose. Keon knew the Council was planning to claim new territories in the Rim sector, where once human colonies had existed. He could not allow that to happen, so he sent a simple order. Prepare for departure for the first time in centuries. Human ships left their hidden bases, engines glowing bright and silent. One by one they joined together until they formed the most powerful armada humanity had ever created. They called it the Dangerous Fleet, not because it sought danger, but because it carried the danger that had been buried for too long. Every person aboard those ships felt the same thing when they looked at the stars. They did not feel hatred. They felt memory. They remembered the ancestors who died fighting alone. They remembered the families who never saw Earth again. They remembered promises whispered in the dark that one day they would return stronger. The fleet carried all those memories like a pulse through its metal veins when it entered the void. It was as if the ghosts of old Earth sailed with them. The Council's spies finally caught a glimpse of the movement. They saw human ships passing through empty systems, and they could not believe what they saw. They sent the footage to their leaders, and for the first time in generations, the Council chambers fell silent. No one dared to speak, because deep down, they all knew what was coming. The humans were not coming to talk. They were coming to finish what had been started long ago. In the following days, the galaxy would learn that silence could be more terrifying than war itself, because when the human fleet arrived there would be no warnings, no speeches, no mercy, just precision and power. The same power that had once built worlds and destroyed them. The same power that had once been forgotten but never lost, the same power that now belonged to the Dangerous Fleet and its commander, Admiral Keon, who looked at the stars not with anger but with purpose, knowing that the time had finally come for humanity to remind the universe that they had never truly left. The war zone that the humans had entered was known as the Rim sector, and for years it had been controlled by the alien coalition. It was a place filled with wrecked ships, drifting cities, and forgotten battles. Whole generations had fought and died. There the air of the nearby colonies was heavy with the smell of burned metal and fear. When the coalition commanders heard that the human fleet was approaching, they did not believe it. At first, they thought it was another false alarm or a group of pirates trying to make a name for themselves. They sent scouts forward, but none returned. They sent drones, but every signal was lost halfway through the system. Something unseen was blocking all transmissions. The coalition fleet began to gather near the largest station in the sector. Their ships surrounded it, forming a wall of metal and light. The commanders sent out orders: prepare for engagement. They believed their numbers would be enough. They had over 2,000 ships armed with plasma, cannons, and heavy missiles. They were wrong. The human fleet came out of the void like a shadow. It moved fast and in complete silence. Not a single radio message was sent. Not a single light blinked on their hulls. The alien radar operators stared at their screens, unable to understand what they were seeing. The readings made no sense. The human ships were appearing and disappearing across their sensors, as if space itself could not hold them steady. The coalition commander shouted for everyone to lock weapons and fire, but before they could, the first human attack began. The sky of the war zone exploded in white light as energy bursts sliced through the darkness. Entire cruisers vanished in seconds, their hulls turning into glowing dust. The shockwave hit the remaining ships and threw them out of formation. Chaos began to spread across the alien fleet. Inside, one of the human ship's soldiers watched the battle unfold through their displays. They had been trained for this moment for years. They did not cheer when their weapons hit the targets. They simply adjusted and aimed again. Everything was quiet inside the ship. No shouting, no panic, only discipline. The commander's voice was calm and steady. Target coordinates updated. Fire sequence 2. The gunners moved their fingers across the controls and new waves of attacks were launched. The enemy could not even see where the shots were coming from. The human ships used no visible weapons, no bright trails, just flashes of destruction that came and went in silence. In the coalition flagship, the alarms were screaming. Officers ran back and forth shouting updates. The commander ordered a retreat, but the engines failed. Their systems were jammed every time they tried to send a command. The screens filled with static. Someone yelled that the human ships were using signal interference far stronger than anything the coalition had ever seen. Their communication networks were collapsing. Ships began to drift into each other, crashing and exploding in panic. The commander slammed his hands on the console, shouting at his crew to fight back, but their weapons would not lock. The sensors were blind, and the enemy was everywhere. At the same time, across the human fleet, Admiral Keon stood in front of the main screen of the flagship, his face cold and calm. He gave no long speeches, no emotional words, only clear orders. He watched the enemy formation fall apart and quietly signaled the second phase of the operation. Small human strike ships separated from the main group, moving in pairs. They slipped between the enemy lines, moving like ghosts, their engines almost invisible. They planted charges on the larger alien cruisers and then vanished before anyone could react. A few moments later, the coalition fleet was hit by another series of explosions, one after another. The sky lit up as thousands of ships broke apart and scattered into the void. On the nearby mining world, people looked up from their shelters as the light from the battle spread across the horizon. They could see entire fleets burning like suns in the distance. It was both beautiful and terrifying. The miners whispered that the humans had returned, but no one dared to say it too loudly. Some began praying, others simply stared. They knew they were witnessing something that would change the galaxy forever. Back on the battlefield, a small group of alien pilots tried to make one final stand. They gathered, their remaining fighters, and charged straight toward the human ships, but before they could reach them, every one of their systems went dark. Their engines died. Their weapons failed. Their navigation shut off. They floated helplessly through space until the human ships passed them by without even firing a shot. They could see through their glass domes the massive shapes of human dreadnoughts moving silently past like giants walking through dust. One of the alien pilots whispered into his radio, asking why the humans did not finish them. No answer came back. His voice echoed in the static. Then the fleet was gone, leaving only the wreckage of what had once been the strongest force in the rim sector. The coalition fleet was destroyed. In less than an hour, no survivors, no communication, no warning. The council back on the Central World received the report too late by the time they analyzed the data. The human ships had already disappeared from scanners. The council chambers erupted into confusion and fear. Their leaders shouted at each other, demanding explanations. Some wanted to send diplomats, others wanted to prepare for war, but none of them knew where to send their fleets because no one could find where the humans had gone. They had entered the war zone like shadows and vanished the same way. Admiral Keon watched the aftermath of the battle from his command deck. Debris floated quietly outside, pieces of metal turning slowly in the starlight. There was no celebration. On his ship, only silence. Every officer knew that this was just the beginning. Keon's eyes reflected the light of the destroyed fleet. He turned to his crew and spoke in a low, steady voice. Begin recovery protocols. Retrieve all data, confirm mission. Complete. His officers nodded and began their work. The human fleet collected what little useful material remained, then turned away from the battlefield and prepared to leave. On the alien side, the news spread fast through the system's worlds that once believed humans were extinct, now knew they were alive and stronger than before. Traders spoke of ships appearing out of nowhere and wiping out fleets within minutes. Colonies near the edge of the galaxy began to evacuate, fearing they might be next. The word human, once said with mockery, was now said with fear. Children asked their parents who the humans were, and the elders replied with stories they had hoped to forget. Stories of fire and war and a planet that had survived everything. As the human fleet moved away, Admiral Keon allowed himself a brief moment to look at the stars. He thought of Earth. He thought of the people still waiting in silence. He thought of the promise he made to them that they would never be forgotten. He knew the galaxy would now remember them not as victims but as warriors, and he also knew that the war was far from over. What had happened today was only the first strike. The message had been sent, and it had been loud enough to echo through every corner of space. The humans had returned, and the universe would never be the same again. The galaxy had gone quiet after the human fleet vanished. The war zone was filled with drifting wrecks and silence. The alien coalition had lost one of its strongest fleets, and their pride was broken across the surviving worlds. There was panic. Governments tried to calm their people, but rumors spread faster than truth. Every system was talking about the same thing: the humans had returned, and they had wiped out an entire armada without warning. No one knew where they had gone after the battle. No one could track them. And that made it even worse. Fear grew in every corner of the galaxy while the Council tried to form a new plan to defend the remaining sectors. Admiral Keon and his fleet were already moving toward the next target, the fortress. World of Denkar was the heart of the Coalition defense grid. It was surrounded by huge orbital cannons and thousands of ships. It had never fallen in any war, and its commanders believed it never would. But that confidence was built on what they knew and not on what was coming. They had heard of what happened in the Rim sector, but they did not believe it. They thought it was an exaggeration. They thought no fleet could be that powerful or that silent. They prepared their defenses and waited for the enemy to make the first move. While on the horizon, the human fleet appeared out of the black nothing of space. The human ships formed a wide circle around the system. Their movements were slow and controlled. Every scanner on Denkar tried to lock on them, but their signals kept vanishing. The alien commander shouted at his officers to hold formation. He believed that the humans would attack from a distance. But that was not their plan. Instead, the human dreadnoughts began to descend toward the planet's orbit, moving lower and lower until they were inside the atmosphere, something that no capital ship had ever done before. The defensive cannons opened fire. The sky turned white with plasma bursts. Thousands of shots hit the clouds, but the human ships kept moving. Not one of them slowed down. Their shields absorbed the energy, like it was nothing. Admiral Keon stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Horizon's Wrath. The ship was shaking slightly from the heat of the atmosphere, but his crew was calm, their faces lit by the glow of the battle below. Keon watched the enemy lines through the tactical display and gave one simple order: begin precision strikes. The ship's belly opened, and dozens of kinetic projectiles dropped toward the ground, each one guided by artificial intelligence. They hit their targets with perfect accuracy. The alien bases that had been hidden under mountains exploded in seconds. Their defenses were torn apart before they could even respond. The entire planet shook under the impact. The Coalition fleet tried to defend Denkar. They launched waves of fighters and bombers toward the human ships, but before they reached them, their systems shut down. The human fleet was jamming every frequency, blocking every signal. The alien pilots screamed over broken radios as their ships spun out of control. Some crashed into each other. Others fell burning through the sky. The few who managed to keep flying tried to ram into the human dreadnoughts, but their weapons could not penetrate the thick armor. Each attempt ended in failure. The Coalition commanders realized they were losing faster than they could react. They sent a final message to the Council asking for reinforcements, but no signal ever made it out of the system. On the ground, the alien soldiers tried to regroup. They gathered in bunkers and trenches waiting for orders, but the humans had already landed. Their dropships fell from the sky like meteors. They hit the ground hard and opened to release armored soldiers. They moved fast and without emotion. Their armor was dark and reflective, their faces hidden behind visors. They did not shout or make noise. They moved through the smoke like shadows, each of them carrying weapons that fired silent bursts of light that cut through walls and armor alike. The aliens fired back, but their shots did nothing. The human armor absorbed it and kept advancing when the fighting ended. There was only smoke and silence. The humans had taken every major base within hours. The alien commander of Denkar tried to flee. He boarded his ship and attempted to escape through the northern orbit, but before he could reach it, a single human cruiser appeared above him. It did not fire. Instead, it transmitted a short-coded message: surrender or vanish. The commander hesitated for a moment, then refused his ship, tried to jump into hyperspace, but the moment the engines activated, the entire vessel imploded. A flash of blue light, and then nothing. No trace, no debris, only empty space. The human cruiser turned and rejoined the fleet without a word. Across the planet, fires burned, and the night sky glowed red from the battleships hovering above. Admiral Keon walked through the main control center of the captured fortress. His boots echoed against the metal floor. The alien prisoners knelt with their hands behind their heads. His officers reported that all resistance was gone. Keon gave a short nod and looked at the main screen showing the planet's map. Every stronghold, every fortress, every weapon site had been destroyed. He gave the order to begin evacuation. They had no interest in occupying the planet. They came to send a message, and the message was clear. No enemy of Earth would be allowed to stand. Before leaving Denkar, the humans erased all communication networks. Every satellite, every beacon, Every recording system was wiped clean when the fleet left. There would be no proof of what had happened. Only ruins and silence. Even the few survivors who hid underground would have nothing to show, no signal. No evidence, no story that could be told to the rest of the galaxy. When the Council later sent scouts, they found only smoke and ashes. They refused to believe that. Humans could have done this alone, but deep down they knew the truth. In the days that followed, the human fleet regrouped beyond the system, repairing and resupplying their ships. Admiral Keon stood alone in the observation chamber, looking at the stars. He was calm, but inside he felt the weight of what they had done. He did not take joy in destruction. He did not celebrate victory. He knew what this war meant. Every planet they destroyed, every fleet they erased would make the galaxy more afraid. But fear was the only thing that kept humanity safe. He remembered the promise he made when he first took command. He swore that humanity would never again be hunted or forgotten. They would stand as one and make sure no one could touch them again. Meanwhile, the Council tried to understand the new threat they gathered, scientists and generals and every piece of data they could find about human technology. They tried to find patterns, weaknesses or explanations, but nothing made sense. Human ships could appear and disappear at will. Their weapons left no energy trails. Their communication was untraceable. Some Council members began to suggest surrender before it was too late, but others refused, claiming that no single species could defeat the entire galaxy. But even as they argued, reports kept coming in from other sectors, trade routes going silent, patrols, disappearing stations destroyed in the dark. The Council began to realize that it was not a rumor anymore. It was a storm. In every corner of space, the name of humanity was spoken again, sometimes in fear, sometimes in awe. The galaxy remembered what had been forgotten. The humans had not changed. They had only become quieter and more dangerous. They had learned patience, and now they were teaching the galaxy what silence before war really meant. Admiral Keon knew that the next move would decide everything. He looked once more at the stars and ordered his fleet to move. The dangerous fleet rose again, engines glowing faintly red as they vanished into the endless black of space, leaving behind only the memory of fire. The human fleet had vanished again after the destruction of Denkar. No one knew where they went. The galaxy waited in fear. Every station and world was whispering stories about what the humans might do next. Trade routes were closed. Convoys refused to leave ports, and the Council had ordered all border systems to prepare for attack. But deep inside, even the strongest commanders knew it would not matter. Nothing could stop the humans if they decided to come. Admiral Keon had taken his fleet far from the Council's reach into the silent outer rim where no signals could be traced. His ships floated in the black void, surrounded by dust and cold light from distant stars inside his command room. Everything was calm. No celebration, no noise, only the soft hum of engines and quiet voices of his crew. The officers worked with discipline. They did not ask questions. They trusted the Admiral. They knew that every move had meaning. Even silence was part of the plan. Keon stood before the main screen, looking at the holographic map that showed the entire known galaxy, each star system glowing faintly before him. The red markers showed the Council's strongholds. The blue ones were human operations, hidden in shadows, scattered but connected by invisible paths. He listened to his chief strategist, who explained that after Denkar, the Council was moving forces toward the core worlds. They were gathering everything they had, but that left the outer colonies weak. Keon understood immediately. He pointed toward 3 systems on the edge of the map and gave a short command. Begin Phase 2. Phase 2 was not a direct attack. It was something more dangerous. It was the beginning of confusion. Human special units were sent in silence, disguised. Ships carrying no flags or codes slipped into enemy systems. They did not fire. They only watched. They planted beacons, hacked communication lines, and spread false messages. The Council began to receive reports of attacks that never happened. They moved fleets to wrong coordinates, leaving real targets. Unguarded, panic and mistrust grew between commanders and governors. They blamed each other, and the unity that had once made the Council strong began to fall apart. The humans were not just fighting with weapons. They were fighting with minds. On one of the distant worlds called Teralis, an alien officer named Ren was assigned to protect a mining station. He was proud, loyal to the Council, and had fought many battles. He had heard of humans but believed they were just myths, stories made to scare soldiers. But that belief changed one night when the sky above his station went dark. The stars disappeared, not because of clouds, but because something was moving above them, a shadow, so large it covered the moon. The alarms went off. Soldiers ran outside pointing weapons into the air, but they saw nothing. Then a soft sound like thunder came from the ground. The base shook and power went out. Ren tried to call for help, but his radio was dead. He ran to the control tower, and from the window he saw a massive ship floating just above the ground, silent and still. Then bright lines of light came down, striking the storage fields. Every vehicle and weapon depot exploded in seconds. Ren screamed for his soldiers to retreat, but it was too late. The humans had arrived. From the ship, hundreds of dark figures descended, their armor glowing faintly in the smoke. They moved in perfect order. Not one of them spoke. Ren fired his weapon, but the energy bolts vanished before they reached the targets. He had never seen anything like it. He watched his soldiers fall one by one as the humans advanced through the dust and fire. He tried to run, but a human soldier appeared. Before him, blocking the path, the figure raised its weapon but then stopped. The soldier tilted his head as if listening to something unseen, and then simply walked away, leaving Ren alive, shaking and unable to move when the humans left the base. There was nothing left but ruins and silence. The next morning, the council ships arrived and found Ren sitting alone, surrounded by ashes, whispering that the humans did not kill him because they wanted him to tell others what he saw. Across the galaxy, more worlds reported similar stories. Sometimes whole stations vanished without a single explosion. Sometimes fleets disappeared in hyperspace, never to return. The council tried to hide the truth, but fear spread faster than control. People stopped trusting the council leaders. Some began to say that humans were not enemies but judges, that they had come to punish the arrogant ones who thought themselves untouchable. These rumors became stronger every day, and even among the council members there were those who started to question their choices. Some said they should send envoys and ask for peace, but others said peace was impossible because no one knew where to find them. Meanwhile, Admiral Keon watched everything unfold exactly as planned. He knew that real power was not in fire but in fear. He wanted the council to destroy itself from the inside without him firing a single shot. His fleet stayed hidden among asteroids, using cloaked stations to refuel and rearm. He walked through the narrow corridors of his ship, talking to his officers. He told them that the purpose of their war was not revenge. It was survival. He reminded them that humanity had suffered once when the galaxy turned against them, and that they had learned the hard way what it meant to be alone. Now they were not fighting for glory or conquest, but to make sure that no one would ever again dare to threaten them. Days passed into weeks and then months. The council sent out search teams to hunt for the human fleet. But each mission ended in silence. Every time a scout ship found something strange, it never came back. Whole fleets vanished without a trace. Some captains refused to obey orders. Others deserted, taking their ships to unknown space. The council's control began to collapse one by one. The member worlds stopped answering their calls. Rebellion started on some planets, and small wars broke out between allies. The once proud and powerful Galactic Alliance was breaking apart. Without the humans even showing themselves, the plan was working perfectly. But Admiral Keon was not blind to the cost. He knew that war, even silent war, changed people. His soldiers had become quiet shadows. They followed orders without emotion. They lived in darkness and isolation, far from their homes. Some of them had not seen a real sky in years. Keon sometimes stood alone in his quarters, thinking about Earth, wondering if peace would ever return. He missed the feeling of wind and the sound of oceans. But he also knew that the galaxy they lived in left no room for softness. He had to stay strong for all of them. One mistake, one hesitation, and everything would fall apart. One night, as the fleet drifted near a dying star, a signal reached them, weak and coded. It was an old human transmission from decades ago, a voice message from before the war. It spoke of unity and hope, and rebuilding the future. Keon listened to it in silence. The voice of a woman, long gone, filled the dark room, reminding him why they started this fight. He closed his eyes, and for a moment the weight of command felt lighter. He realized that the war would not last forever. It could not. It must end one day when the galaxy finally understood that peace with humans was the only path to survival. In the council chambers, chaos ruled. Senators shouted at each other, generals resigned, and worlds threatened to leave the alliance. The fear of humans had become greater than any other enemy they had ever known. They began to turn against each other, calling every shadow a threat, every silence an invasion. They built more weapons, more ships, but none of it brought them safety because deep inside they knew it was not the weapons that would save them. It was understanding, and that was something they had never learned. The galaxy was burning from within, and the humans did not need to fire another shot. The storm was spreading, and no one could stop it. Admiral Keon watched the last report come in from his intelligence officers. The council was breaking faster than expected. He gave the final order for the fleet to move toward the outer border for the last phase of the plan. His ships turned their engines toward the darkness, and one by one they disappeared into hyperspace, silent like ghosts. The stars swallowed them, and space became quiet again, waiting for the next move, waiting for the end of everything. The human fleet moved through the dark space in complete silence, their engines glowing faintly against the black void. Admiral Keon stood on the bridge, looking at the endless stars, knowing that the end of their long mission was near. The war that had begun in fear and anger was now reaching its last chapter, and the galaxy was not the same anymore. No one trusted anyone, and the council that once ruled everything had become weak and broken. Keon's plan had worked better than he had ever imagined, and yet as he watched the stars, he felt no joy, only a heavy silence inside him. He thought about the cost of what they had done, and wondered if humanity would ever be free from the shadow of war. In the distance, far from his fleet, the council's remaining forces were gathering what was left of their power. The last loyal commanders were meeting on the planet Varel, a cold and gray world filled with factories and smoke. They planned to make one final stand. They wanted to rebuild their fleets and strike back, even though they knew their chances were small. They believed they had to try for the honor of their people. General Thorin, the highest military leader of the council, stood before the gathered captains, his face hard with anger, shouted that the humans could not be allowed to rule through fear. He promised to fight until the last ship was gone, and his words gave the soldiers a small spark of courage, but deep down, many of them already knew the truth. They had seen what humans could do. They had seen whole armadas vanish without warning. They were not facing a normal enemy. They were facing something they could not understand. While the council prepared its final defense, Keon was ready to end it. His fleet had grown. Stronger, every battle had taught them new lessons. Every captured signal and every silent victory had made them smarter. They now had the perfect map of the galaxy and knew every weakness of their enemies. But Keon did not want another destruction. He wanted silence to speak for him. He wanted the council to surrender without fire. He called his officers and explained that they would move toward Varel not to destroy it, but to end the war once and for all. The officers listened and nodded. They trusted him completely, and they were ready for whatever was needed. The fleet entered the Varel system quietly, hundreds of ships gliding through the blackness invisible to the eyes of the enemy below the planet. The Council's defense systems began to detect strange signals, but before they could react, every radar, every communication channel, and every weapon system went dark, one by one, as if the planet itself was falling asleep. Panic spread through the control centers. Officers shouted into dead radios, and ships in orbit tried to contact each other, but no one could hear them. Then, out of the darkness, human ships appeared, forming a massive circle around the planet. They did not fire. They did not send threats. They only floated. They're like silent watchers surrounding Varel with cold light. General Thorin stood inside the command room, staring at the main screen, when the image of a human flagship appeared above the planet. His hands shook, but he refused to show fear. He ordered his men to prepare the weapons, but nothing worked. No power, no control, everything was gone. He realized then that the humans could have destroyed them at any moment, but they had not. He understood that this was not an attack. This was a message. The humans were showing what true power meant, not in destruction but in control. A communication signal came through clear and strong for the first time in hours, and a voice filled the room. It was Admiral Keon. He spoke slowly and calmly, saying that the war was over. He told them that humanity did not wish to rule but would no longer bow to anyone. He said that the galaxy had learned enough about pain and fear, and now it was time to choose peace. The silence that followed was heavy. Every officer and soldier on Varel listened as his voice echoed through their speakers. Keon told them that if the Council ever threatened humanity again, there would be no warning and no mercy. But if they accepted peace, then the future could begin again for everyone, and then the signal ended, leaving them all standing there in silence. General Thorin lowered his head. He had fought many wars, but he had never felt this kind of defeat. Not by fire, but by the truth. He knew there was no point in fighting anymore. And so he gave the only order left to give. He ordered the surrender. The Council's last fleet powered down their weapons and sent a universal signal declaring the end of the war across the galaxy. The news spread faster than light. People came out of shelters. Soldiers stopped fighting, and for the first time in decades there was no sound of battle. Only quiet. On the human flagship, Admiral Keon received the message. His crew began to cheer softly. Some hugged each other, others simply sat down in silence, tears in their eyes. They had won, but it did not feel like victory. Keon walked to the main window and looked at the blue light of the planet below. He thought about all the lives lost on both sides, and about how much it had taken to reach this moment. He told his officers to stand down and begin preparations to return home. It was time to go back to Earth. The war was over. As the fleet turned away from Varel, the stars ahead seemed brighter. Keon stood alone for a moment, thinking of the generations to come. He hoped they would never have to know what this war had been. He hoped that humanity would remember not the glory of battle, but the strength of unity and discipline that had brought them through it. He knew that peace would not last forever, that someday new threats would rise. But he also knew that now the galaxy would think twice before raising a weapon against Earth. Humanity had become more than a legend. They had become a warning. When the fleet finally reached the edge of human territory, signals from Earth began to come through after years of silence. Voices of families, scientists, and leaders filled the channels. They were calling their soldiers home, telling them that the planet had rebuilt, that children were learning about the war, not with hate but with pride that they had survived. Keon listened quietly, and for the first time in years he smiled. He gave the command for all ships to head to orbit, and soon the dark fleet that had once brought fear to the galaxy became a line of light moving toward their home. The return of the fleet was a moment that would never be forgotten. When the ships entered Earth's orbit, the sky above the planet turned silver. Thousands of people gathered in cities watching the light trails across the night. They did not see soldiers. They saw heroes who had carried the burden of humanity and brought it back alive. Keon walked down the ramp of his ship, greeted by the sound of voices and flags waving in the air. He looked at the faces of the people, young and old, filled with hope and pride, and he finally felt peace. Years later, the galaxy had changed. The Council was no longer what it used to be. It became a union of worlds built on fear of the humans, but also respect. There were still tensions, still mistrust, but there was also trade dialogue and slowly understanding. Admiral Keon retired quietly, living near the sea, where he could watch the horizon every evening. He sometimes thought about the war and the choices he made. He never regretted them, but he always remembered the silence after the last battle. That silence was his true victory. On the edge of the galaxy, a small station kept watch on the stars one night. A young officer asked his captain if the humans would ever come again. The captain smiled and said that no one knew, but that if they did, it would not be for war. It would be because someone had forgotten what peace meant. And then he looked out the window, at the endless sky where the stars burned quietly, and said that as long as humans remembered their past, the galaxy would remain safe. Far away, in deep space beyond the reach of any map, a small light flickered for a moment, and then vanished, leaving behind the calm and empty void, and with it the long echo of a story that would be told for generations about the time when the human dangerous fleet arrived in the Warzone, wiped out and annihilated the enemy without warning, and changed the fate of the galaxy forever.